antidiuretic hormone. This is the one which prevents the excretion of water from the urine. Vasopressin or antidiuretic hormone, these are the names. This is also known as arginine vasopressin. Arginine vasopressin. This topic I chose because one of your classmates asked for a vasopressin escape, which I would be dealing later on in this lecture. Now I have on the right hand side the entire scheme for the vasopressin, which I am discussing. I will not spend time here to discuss about this component, the picture I had shown, because that would bring you everything about the ADH or vasopressin. Now, where it is secreted? That's the first question. Let me tell you, it is a neurohormone. It's not a pure hormone, it is a neurohormone. That means it's a neural secretion coming from the hypothalamus, released into the adenohypophysis or the posterior pituitary in the circulation here. So that means there are hypothalamo-hyphophysial tract. These are the fibers coming from the hypothalamus. The two nuclei of the hypothalamus participate in it. Supraoptic nucleus, this is optic chiasma, this is supraoptic nucleus, and the paraventricular nucleus, that is the ventricle here, the paraventricular nucleus. These are the two nuclei participate in the secretion of this hormone. That means the neurons are located here, the axons come here and release the transmitter now as a hormone into the circulation, which enters into the hypophyseal portal system. So that enters the circulation and that goes to this thing. So now we have two hormones in the posterior pituitary. This is a posterior pituitary blue one. These are two hormones from the posterior pituitary. Okay. So now this is a peptide hormone with 9 amino acid residues. Nonapeptide with 9 amino acid residues and known as arginine vasopressin. I mentioned about the paraventricular nucleus and supraoptic nucleus where the neurons are located. It participates in the regulation of the homeostasis of the water and homeostasis of the blood pressure. These are the two important functions of the ADH. Now, going little higher up. So now this ADH, now these are the paraventricular nucleus and supraoptic nucleus. In these neurons, whatever the neurons there, they secrete the hormone from a large peptide. This is a large peptide. This large peptide is having a AVP, neurophysin 2 and copeptide. This large peptide is existing as a pro-pressure physin. And even this, if I include all these 1 to 164 amino acids, this is a pre-pro-pressure physin. That means there is a total complex, total large molecular weight compound that is more than 164 amino acids. Now between 20 and 28, 20 to 28 form the AVP. So this is the configuration of the AVP. That means the cysteine, tyrosine, phenylalanine, glycine, and aspartic acid. These are the amino acid residues. This is the amine terminal. So this forms the AVP or arginine vasopressin. Now, the neurophysin 2 is also one of the factors that is necessary for the neural growth and a copeptide. Now, I am just, before leaving this component, I will just mention, since the arginine vasopressin it is metabolized because it is secreted from the neuron here and it is released into the circulation, and we have peptidase or what is called a vasopressinase enzyme that breaks down the arginine vasopressin, and that is metabolized. So that means the half-life of the released ADH is about 18 to 20 minutes. It's only 18 to 20 minutes. So once released. So that means it is metabolized by the peptidase present in the plasma and the extracellular fluid. Now, because of this, we cannot measure the arginine vasopressin easily, because whenever you try to measure, you will not know it exactly. So now, what the people, what the clinically, what we will try to do, we will try to estimate the copeptide secretion. That is an indicator of the AVP activity from the posterior pituitary. Okay, this is just the synthesis and metabolism. Okay, because the metabolism is there everywhere in the plasma, even in the terminals where it is going up, the peptidase enzymes are there that breaks down. This is the schema. Schema here is hypothalamus. This entire oval structure is a hypothalamus. In this hypothalamus, we have one group of neurons, what are known as a osmoreceptor, the tiny osmoreceptors, which sense the osmotic activity. Now these osmoreceptors are connected with this paraventricular nucleus and supraoptic nucleus. And these osmoreceptors, when the osmolality increases, that would activate these things, that would make them to release the antidiuretic hormone. That means the osmolality has increased here. So this is what is the order to the kidney is not to excrete water, you retain water so that the osmolality can be balanced. So that is the message. Okay, so that is about the brief about the units of secretion. Now I repeat, the main components are the hypothalamus are the osmoreceptors, the paraventricular nucleus, supraoptic nucleus, the posterior pituitary, it is also known as a neurohypophysis, and then this is a ADH. Same oxytocin also comes from the same group of neurons. Now, going back with the ADH action, I already mentioned the ADH tries to absorb water from the kidney, especially that part of the kidney that is a collecting duct. This is a collecting duct here. From this part of the kidney, the water is reabsorbed. How it is being reabsorbed? Because this component, if you are seeing the kidney here we have the loop of Henle and the medulla. This is becoming medulla. And as you go deeper and deeper, the osmolality of the medium is higher. This is the maximum here in the tip of the loop of Henle. So now there are channels, what are called water channels or aquaporins. So now these water channels try to balance the water movement, and these water channels are clubbed with the what are called the vasopressin receptors. There are two types of receptors here in the kidney or in the collecting duct. These are V2 receptors. Now these V2 receptors are the G protein coupled receptors. So that means when the ADH molecule, the peptide molecule, comes and sits on the V2 receptors, and this ligand, when it sits on the receptor, it will activate the adenylate cyclase, and the activation of the adenylate cyclase leads to the formation of the cyclic AMP. And this cyclic AMP phosphokinase C pathway, so that means it activates the phosphokinase C and then opens up the aquaporin 2 channels. So that means the aquaporin 2 channels are here, that opens up. Once it opens up, water moves. Exactly, these are channels. Suppose this is the condition here for the water movement is the movement is coming from the this is highly osmotic, this is less osmotic, So this will try to dilute the flux. Suppose if both are equal, no movement. So that means even if you open the channels, it will not move. Suppose if I were to ask you a question, if say that if there is no medullary osmotic concentration gradient, if it is not created by the countercurrent mechanism, so then these aquaporin 2 channels, even if they are open, they are not going to make the flux of water or movement of water from the collecting duct into this. Okay, leaving aside, now coming back, this is cyclic AMP dependent mechanism which opens up the water channels. That is the water reabsorption. This water reabsorption is through the V2 receptors. Now, the second action of ADH is a vasopressor action. This vasopressor action is producing the smooth muscle contraction. Especially it participates in the intermediate and the long-term regulation of blood pressure. Now let us see what is the mechanism of action of these. Now this would be activating the V1 receptors. So that means vasopressin 1 receptor. So that is the vasopressin sits on the V1 receptor. Again, this is also a G protein coupled receptor. And here the pathway used here is different. Here adenylate cyclase CAMP pathway. Here what is happening? We have a diacylglycerol or PLC pathway or inositol triphosphate pathway. Okay, these two PAG, PLC, diacylglycerol and the PLC, phospholipase C and inositol triphosphate signaling that will release the calcium from the endoplasmic reticulum. That means within the cell, the calcium storehouse is there that releases the calcium. That released calcium participates in the excitation, contraction, coupling of the smooth muscles. That means that produces the smooth muscle contraction, and this smooth muscle contraction produces the vasospasm and increases the blood pressure. So that means we look into the situation how this would be helpful. So that means the ADH has two actions. One action is to retain water, expand plasma, and because there is what is called a hyperosmolality here sensed by the osmoregulators, and it will try to constantly this thing increase the blood pressure. So that means the plasma volume is expanded, and that increases the blood vessels constriction and increases the blood pressure. Okay, we will move on to the, I have already mentioned about it, reabsorption of water from the collecting duct, especially the medullary component where there is a great concentration gradient. So then through the V2 aquaporin 2 cyclic AMP mechanism, trying to remember that, and it depends upon the osmotic gradient present in the medulla. That is what I mentioned. Then total amount of water reabsorbed from the collecting duct or from this ADH action is about 1/8 of the total filtered load. What is filtered load of the water? That is equal to the GFR. GFR is about 125 ml per minute. 125 ml per minute. So 1/8 of the 125 ml. Say for example, if you make it 120 ml divided by 1/8, it will approx is equal to 15 ml of water is reabsorbed from this component. So this is 15 ml per min. So that means 1/8 of the GFR it is reabsorbed. Now, if many of the textbooks mention, if I convert it for a day, it would be around 22 to 23 liters per day, or per hour, it may be about a liter per hour. So this is what approx I gave you the value here. And this type of water reabsorption is dependent upon the function of ADH, function of hormone. This is called a facultative reabsorption of water. The facultative means depending upon some factors that govern the water reabsorption. There are two things participate in the facultative reabsorption of water. One, the aldosterone through the sodium reabsorption, and then ADH is through the water reabsorption. So now this would be much greater than the aldosterone. It's aldosterone may in the facultative reabsorption, aldosterone may only add to the 2%. That means 1/8. If it is 15 ml there, so that maybe another 2 ml is added. Totally, there will be 17 ml of water is reabsorbed from the facultative reabsorption of water. Okay, so there is one more term used here. So it is a free water clearance, because water is without any conditions. There are no conditions. Only water is being cleared or being reabsorbed. So this is a free water clearance, depends upon the ADH. So thus increases the plasma water concentration, because the water is retained back, enters into the extracellular fluid and into the blood vessels, and then this entry of plasma increases the plasma water content and decreases the plasma sodium concentration. That is called hyponatremia. Okay, that I will leave it here. I will come back later. Okay, now about BP regulation. The ADH in BP regulation, it possesses moderate vasopressor action, not much, but moderate. And it participates in the intermediate and the long-term regulation of blood pressure. You say short-term regulation of blood pressure includes the baroreceptors, chemoreceptors, and the ischemic response. And the intermediate and long-term regulation, we have those the renin-angiotensin pressure system, renin-angiotensin aldosterone mechanism, and then other mechanisms participating in this thing, thirst mechanism and vascular biophysical components, they become to play. That means vascular relaxation or contraction. So those biophysical parameters also play. In the long-term regulation, it is the aldosterone, the renin-angiotensin aldosterone mechanism. Also the vasopressor response also adds to that mechanism. So these two components. Now, how does it increase the blood pressure? By increasing the plasma volume. That means increases the stroke volume or increases the cardiac filling and greater output. And also by the vasoconstriction produced by the vasopressin. So that produces both these two factors, increases the plasma volume and the vasoconstriction. That is how the ADH works. What are the factors which regulate ADH secretion? Here I have just made two components. One, plasma osmolality. Number two, plasma volume. Let us consider plasma osmolality. The plasma osmolality is directly linked with the osmoreceptors present in the hypothalamus. This plasma osmolality can increase directly, because if I consume large amount of sodium, that is a direct, or any other hypertonic solution, or large amount of glucose. Suppose in patients with the diabetes mellitus, uncontrolled diabetes mellitus, what happens? There will be large enormous quantity of glucose is present in the blood, 400 milligram per deciliter. Normally it is about 80 milligram to 120 milligram per deciliter. So that means 4 times increase. The 4-time increase that would increases the osmolality. So that means it's a direct action. If there is a greater intake of the osmotically active substances, here I have mentioned about sodium. That is a direct. Indirect means if I lose water, because if somebody has a diarrhea or a plasma loss, vomiting, in that situation, what happens? So water is lost, especially in a cholera-like situations. The water is lost, that would produce the hemoconcentration, that would increases the osmolality. This is indirect. Both of these things would produce or increase their osmolality. That osmolality activate the osmoreceptors. Osmoreceptors in turn activate the paraventricular nucleus and the supraoptic nucleus to release the antidiuretic hormone. And these antidiuretic hormone, now they will act on the collecting duct to open up those aquaporins and reabsorb the water. It enters into the interstitium there or in the blood vessels. That is the one component. So now coming back with the plasma volume. If there is a decreased plasma volume, here is a condition in which there is a blood loss. The person has lost blood, hemorrhage. If there is a decreased plasma volume or the blood volume, what happens? If there is a decreased blood volume, this blood volume is sensed by the baroreceptors present in the atria, ventricles, the great vessels, the arch of aorta, and the carotid sinus. So that is why I have made these. So now 10th, 11th, 9th, and 10th cranial nerve, they participate and they carry the information to the nucleus tractus solitarius. And they would, because if there is a decreased plasma, this thing, there is a decreased activity reaching there, because these baroreceptors work for increased pressure. So now when it is decreased activity going from the baroreceptors. That is what I have written here for your guidance. I have written this thing: decreased plasma volume decreases the barodischarge. If the barodischarge is decreased, so now it has in the NTS there are projection to supraoptic nucleus. That means hypothalamic projections, the reticulo or the reticulo-hypothalamic tract. This is a reticulo-hypothalamic tract. It is in the medulla. So that means a supraoptic, there will be a inhibition. I have made broken lines there. These are inhibitory pathway. When there is an increase, they would inhibit. When there is a less inhibition, so the inhibition is decreased. It is a sort of a disinhibition or withdrawal of inhibition. If the withdrawal of inhibition, that would there is less inhibition on the supraoptic and paraventricular nucleus, and a greater ADH is released. Now that would increase the activity. In addition, already the NTS is working for increasing sympathetic activity here. That would produce the sympathetic activity there. That is one thing the baroreceptors are doing in the short-term regulation. Now, through this mechanism, that is why I'm telling it is an intermediate mechanism. It would increase the ADH activity. This vasopressin constrict the blood vessels and trying to bring back the blood pressure, because there is a fall in the blood volume or the plasma volume. At the same time, now the aim of the ADH is to increase the plasma volume, because there is the basic problem it started was the decreased plasma volume. Now to increase the plasma volume, what happens? Water is retained. Water enters into the blood vessels and in the extracellular fluid and increases the plasma volume. That is what the whatever I have written: decreased plasma volume, barodischarge, decreased excitation of the NTS, decreased inhibition. That means the inhibition which is going there, it is diminished or withdrawal, and increased ADH secretion. Increased ADH secretion constricts one side and retain water. Retention of water increases the plasma volume, and the constriction of the blood volume increases the blood pressure. That is what the actions of these are the two regulators of the ADH secretion. Okay, so now that's not all about ADH secretion. There are many other regulators. So now I have made these are the first which increase the ADH secretion, the factors which increase ADH secretion, factors which decrease ADH secretion I have listed here. So now let us start with the factors which increase ADH secretion are the exercise, stress, because the stress increases the blood pressure. At the same time, it will increase the glucocorticoid corticotropin activity. Also, it will stimulate the hypothalamic this hormone or the hypothalamo-hyphophysial tract to secrete ADH to retain the blood pressure. Pain, because you have the pain, so from the pain there are reticulohypothalamic fibers that would try to increase the ADH secretion. Nausea or vomiting, that vomiting center, because in anticipation there would be the ADH secretion. That means the what the vomiting is happening, so that means to try to have a precaution. That means you have the normal built up of the osmolality. Then angiotensin 2, these, and hypoglycemia and angiotensin 2, all of these things activate or increase the ADH secretion. Now, the factors that decrease ADH secretion are: 1, caffeine. Whenever we consume caffeine, coffee, so it is natural that we would go to the restroom very frequently. So that means caffeine has 2 components. One, here it will inhibit the release of ADH, one component. The caffeine here in the distal convoluted tubule, it is a phosphodiesterase 4 inhibitor. It is a phosphodiesterase 4 inhibitor. What's this phosphodiesterase? Phosphodiesterase 4, that means the adenyl cyclase cyclic AMP. Cyclic AMP is inactivated by the phosphodiesterase into 5-CAMP, that is inactivated. Now, caffeine is a phosphodiesterase inhibitor, so that means in the distal tubule also it blocks. So by both these counts, one here, by closing these aquaporin channels, by not allowing to open by cyclic AMP, and then this one here, both these counts, it increases the diuresis, that means increased water excretion. Then alcohol inhibits the ADH secretion. Norepinephrine, some of these pathways are norepinephrinergic, some are cholinergic pathways, some are norepinephrine. They are norepinephrine and atrial natriuretic peptide that would suppress the ADH secretion. These are, now I will repeat: plasma osmolality, plasma volume, important. These are other factors: exercise, stress, pain, nausea, hypoglycemia, angiotensin 2, increase the secretion of ADH because they want to help. Angiotensin 2, if they want help, increase the blood volume. So then caffeine, alcohol, norepinephrine, and atrial natriuretic peptide, they inhibit the secretion of ADH. Now, I am just little worry about the exercise and ADH secretion. So when you start the muscular activity, that promotes the sweating, that we all know. We start doing some activity that promotes sweating. Sweating results in loss of water, and the loss of water leads to hemoconcentration. Okay, once there is a hemoconcentration, increases the ECF or extracellular fluid osmolality. So this increase in the extracellular fluid osmolality, these are all listed here in this graph because they are too small to be seen. I have just written here. This increased osmolality activates the osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus. Now these osmoreceptors, they will activate the hypothalamo-hyphophysial tract to release ADH in the pituitary, postpituitary. So ADH increases the water reabsorption because water is lost, water reabsorption from the CD, and decreases the urinary output because if the water is reabsorbed, urinary output is decreased, and thus try to maintain the water balance. This is what happens in case of exercise. This one you can have this thing, and it is a very exercise and antidiuresis or antidiuretic secretion. Now, What are the disorders of ADH secretion? I have 3 disorders listed here. 1, diabetes insipidus. 2, syndrome of inappropriate secretion of ADH, that is SIADH. And 3, the vasopressin escape. Let us consider diabetes insipidus first. Diabetes insipidus means it is bland, insipid, bland. Diabetes mellitus is honey, sweet. It is not sweet, it is bland. The diabetes insipidus, here in this condition, there is a large amount of urine is passed, dilute urine is passed. So now, if I were to recall how much large we can lose, because it is equivalent to 1/8 of the total filtered load. That may be around 22 to 24 liters, 22 to 24 liters. It cannot be greater, because that is the part which is the collecting duct or the distal nephron can handle that much amount of water only by the ADH. So that means, so a person, suppose in a condition where there is a deficiency of ADH, in that condition, that is the maxima. That is maxima is 22 liters. Though, okay, let us come back. It is a syndrome that results when there is a deficiency of ADH or diminished responsiveness of ADH. I added 2 components. One is a central component, the deficiency of ADH. That means the secretion from the posterior pituitary is decreased. Either hypothalamus is involved or posterior pituitary is involved. We don't know exactly. So that means deficiency of ADH or non-responsiveness or less responsiveness of the kidney. So now the deficiency of ADH is known as a central diabetes insipidus. That is the problem with the posterior pituitary gland. Then second component, non-responsiveness or diminished responsiveness of ADH is known as the fault is in the kidney. That is a nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. Here the kidneys fail to respond. Okay, so now what happens? Why there is a deficiency? The posterior pituitary, maybe because of the ischemia necrosis or the infections or systemic diseases like such as sarcoidosis that affect hypothalamus, or a gene that synthesizes the presophysin, that whole molecule. So there is a problem with the genetics. So that means we have a vascular component, infectious component, and degenerative components, and the genetic components. Now, in the vascular component, I am just trying to give you one important example. Postpartum. In some ladies, after the delivery, so the posterior pituitary goes into necrosis. The postpartum necrosis, posterior pituitary necrosis. So this is known as a Seehan's syndrome. That is one of the vascular lesion. Vessel goes into spasm, and that spasm results in the loss of the posterior pituitary, and this now lady will lose the control of the urine concentration ability, because the dilute urine is passed. So postpartum pituitary necrosis, what is called a postpartum pituitary necrosis, this is because of the vascular spasm results in the posterior pituitary after delivery. This is a known condition. This is known as a Seehan's syndrome. Seehan's syndrome. Now, this is a central diabetes insipidus. Nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, it is a diminished responsiveness. Diminished responsiveness because there may be fewer receptors expressed on the fewer receptors means the V2 receptors on the collecting duct are fewer, or the down regulation of the adenyl cyclase enzyme, down regulation of the aquaporin channels, so on. You can have all those downstream pathways which is responsible for the kidneys not responding to ADH. Here the central component is all right, but the kidney is not able to respond. So this is about central and renal diabetes insipidus. Now coming back, what are the symptoms of diabetes insipidus? Polyuria, the increased volume of urine. Try to differentiate polyuria from the frequency of micturition. Frequency of micturition is seen in a urinary tract infection where the patient goes very often to the restroom and he does not pass, only there is irritation in the urethra or the urinary tract. But polyuria is the large copious amount of urine is passed, and it is the volume. That means passage of large amounts of urine. Now, what type of urine? Dilute urine. Polyuria is also seen in diabetes mellitus. So there, polyuria is because of the osmotic reabsorption, osmotic withholding of the water, because in the urine there is a large amount of glucose. Glucose withholds the water. It does not allow the water to move, because even the aquaporin channel, aquaporin 2 channels open up, but this is the osmotic gradient cannot go as high as that. It's only small, because it is governed by the amount of glucose present in the tubule. That is the osmotically active glucose. Okay. Now it is associated with polydipsia. Polydipsia is a increased drinking of large amount, because the urine water is lost. The dipsia, that means he keeps on drinking water, and this try to because of the thirst mechanism is activated. So polydipsia comes in. Because of the polydipsia, the water loss is balanced. Suppose a person is there, he's going often and he's passing large amount of urine and he's coming and drinking. So this is in balance. In case the thirst mechanism is depressed or suppressed for any reason, now the dilute fluid decreases the plasma volume. This will develop a fatal dehydration, because there is no intake. No intake is initiated. If the intake is not initiated, there is a dehydration, or the water loss continues, and a total dehydration that produce a fatal condition. It's a very severe dehydration results. That is about diabetes insipidus.